Hey, good morning. How is everyone? Everyone feel good about branding? Excellent. Sasha was amazing. My name is Tom Work. I am the owner of Work Communications. I'm the executive director of the Specialty Wine Retailers Association, and I write Fermentation, the daily wine blog. We have some good news for you here today about the state of the direct-to-consumer wine shipping market. Together, ShipCompliant and Wines and Vines produced the most authoritative research and study into the winery to consumer shipping market, and that's what we're going to look at here today. Before jumping into it, I want to introduce the gentlemen who are going to help present what is a large amount of data. Kent Nowlin is Director of Finance at ShipCompliant.com. He is the numbers guy, so he's quite equipped to do this. And we also have Danny Brager from Nielsen. He is Vice President of their alcohol beverage team. Danny is one of the foremost authorities on the beverage alcohol retail market in the United States and elsewhere. Today, Danny and Kent are going to be presenting data that comes from an extraordinary source. First of all, we're looking at direct-to-consumer shipping over the past 12 months ending in April 2012. So it goes from May 2011 to April 2012. And in that time, ShipCompliant has run more than 5 million transactions through its system. They've anonymized, I think that's a word, made anonymous all this data, and then they connected up with Wines and Vines, who with their more than 7,000 winery database and with all this data from ShipCompliant, they can put it together and they can do an extraordinarily accurate job of extrapolating what the true direct-to-consumer shipping market is. And that's what they're going to present today. I usually prefer to run these seminars by taking questions throughout the seminar, and if you have a question, just raise your hand. We're not going to do that today because what these folks are going to be doing here is telling you a story, and the story is sort of compelling, and I'd like to see them be able to get through it. So what we'll do is we'll save some time at the end of the presentation for questions. In addition, the presentation that you're going to see here will be available at the ShipCompliant.com website. Just go to ShipCompliant.com/events, and you'll be able to find this presentation. And so with that, let me bring up Kent Nowlin to start the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? We'll get the mic scenario situated. This is a great turnout for our breakout session. I guess all of you are so utterly intrigued by numbers that's why you're here, because this is the most exciting of the breakout sessions, talking about numbers. Is that true? All right, that's good. That's how I look at it. My name is Kent Nowlin, as Tom said, Director of Finance for ShipCompliant, and I am a self-proclaimed numbers lover. Do we have any other number lovers in the audience? All right, so my job is to convert the rest of you to number lovers. The thing that I love about numbers is that it's similar to the alphabet. You take each letter by itself, doesn't give you a whole lot. You put them together, formulate some words, then you have something. You can formulate words: fire, danger, smoke. Those are useful words. Formulate them into sentences, then you even have more information. And then so on and so forth. You can have books and then editions of books. And that's how I view numbers. You put together the numbers, you take date ranges, you can look at different categories of the numbers, but you put those numbers into useful information, then you have a story. And so today, Danny and I are going to be the librarian. So we're going to be holding up the book and presenting to you the story. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to take that story and draw conclusions and create all kinds of assumptions based on the information that I'm finding, but that's not what I'm here to do today. We're the librarian, we're reading the story, you make the assumptions and you draw the conclusions. And so I can tell you right now, my canned response to any question that says, well, what do you think about this? Is going to be, that's a great question. What do you think about this? So I'm going to take the approach of the psychiatrist with that. So anyway, let's begin. ShipCompliant and Wines and Vines, this is the third year of doing that, of putting together this data to present direct-to-consumer shipments. And as Tom said, we use all of the data from ShipCompliant and the Wines Vine database in an aggregate format that is anonymous. So one thing that is important to note, and it'll probably be mentioned a couple times, is that we're not dealing with January to December, annual sales data. We are looking at May 2011 to April 2012. What we're trying to do is give you the most recent up-to-date information. And so that's how we will be presenting it. So, as you're well aware, this piece of the pie right here is total wine produced in the U.S. for U.S. consumption. That's all of the production that's going on and the shipments associated with that. 3% is the direct-to-consumer channel. It's a very small sliver of that, but it's very important, and it is growing, as you will see. The direct-to-consumer channel, the tasting room is a majority of that, but 40% of that is related to shipments. And that, right here, is what this whole conference and what this whole presentation will be about, is just this small portion over here. 2.95 million shipments of direct-to-consumer. It's 40% of the direct-to-consumer channel. The methodology, as Tom was pointing out, we collect the data. It's an aggregate form. We are extremely confident in that the model that we've presented with the data that we have is an accurate picture of the entire direct-to-consumer shipping market. We are looking at data that's representative of wineries by size, location, and bottle price and level. We'll be looking at trailing 12-month averages. We'll be looking at year-over-year growth. And again, we are confident that this is a good representation of the total market. So who's doing what, when, and where? Again, from U.S. wineries to U.S. consumers, 12-month period, and third year ShipCompliant wines and vines. With that, I want to introduce Danny.
Thank you. So I'm the assistant librarian today, and I'm really here to provide sort of the other part of the story, and perhaps to provide some context for the channel that you deal with. So I'm dealing with a different slice of the pie. At Nielsen, we're measuring sort of the retail trade off-premise piece. So we gather data from a whole bunch of different retailers across the country and a whole bunch of different channels that sell wine. Grocery channel, drugstores, convenience stores, even dollar stores sell wine now, and Dollar General. People on the military bases can buy wine. Club stores sell wine, obviously. Mass merchants sell wine, increasingly so. And then there's lots of liquor stores across the country, especially in markets where we gather data where you can't sell wine in grocery stores. So we gather a lot of data, say, from the Northeast or from Colorado or from Minnesota, where you can't buy in a grocery store, to sort of provide a liquor perspective, and also obtain a lot of data from a lot of chains. So the Beverages and More, the Total Wines and More, ABC in Florida, and so on and so forth. So we put that all together and project it up so that we're measuring sort of the total U.S. retail off-premise side of the picture. And to be in concert with the data that Kent's showing, we also picked the same time period, so 52 weeks through the end of April. Actually, we gather data on a regular basis. We actually have data now into June, but I sort of backed it up, so we'd be looking at the same time periods. And we'll be looking at a year-over-year comparison, just like Kent will, so that we can sort of compare and contrast what's the same, what's different, what if you added it together, what does it look like, et cetera. So to put sort of our piece of the pie, and frankly, anything that we can collectively do to grow the pie, and the pies can be in different slices, but what's good about growing the pie is essentially that's good for all of us. So if we take that pie apart, we're measuring the blue part, about 54% of case volume in the U.S. That's about 166 million cases of 9-liter wine, which is about $13 billion of consumer spending. The other two pieces of the pie, 19%, about 20% is on-premise. That's how much volume goes through restaurants, bars, nightclubs for wine. And then there's another 20%, which are pieces of the off-premise that we're not measuring. It's places like Pennsylvania, for instance, is a control state. It's some retailers like Whole Foods that don't choose to cooperate and provide their data to syndicated suppliers like us, and it's where the direct-to-consumer piece fits into. It's part of that 27%. So that's kind of the part that I'll bring to the story. And to just put the channel, the direct-to-consumer shipment channel into perspective relative to our numbers, The DTC numbers, if you add it all together, it's about 2% as large as all Nielsen measured channels on volume, but because of the price points that you're selling at, it's a pretty healthy piece on value. It's up to 11% as large as all the Nielsen channels that we measure. And if you think of just like grocery stores, so people that go into grocery stores that buy wine and compare the DTC shipment volume and value to just grocery stores, we get up to almost 21% as large as grocery stores all across the United States that sell wine. So certainly from a value standpoint, this channel, as it's grown and grown, has become a pretty, healthy piece from just a total size standpoint. And as it continues to grow, obviously, it becomes larger and larger as a percentage of that total pie. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kent to continue the story.
Okay, we're going to start off with taking a big picture look at what's happening in the direct-to-consumer shipments. So the volume, real quick, we're going to be looking at two different ways of measuring the data. We're going to be measuring it from a volume standpoint, so the number of cases shipped, but also the value. So what was the price of those cases that shipped? And that's where we're going to be kind of digging into everything. So we'll try and keep it volume and then value so as to not get overly confused. But and I do apologize. There are a lot of slides. We will be going through a lot of data, and we will try to keep this as entertaining as possible so that you'll retain it. So volume of direct-to-consumer shipments up 8.19%, and that is really important to note. The whole point of all of this is that we're demonstrating that direct-to-consumer is a viable, growing sales channel, and it is important to see that it's continuing to grow year over year. So 8.1% for volume. The value is up 11.5%. And so, again, that's nearly $139 million more in the last 12 months than in the previous 12 months. Now, versus the in-store that Danny's data is going to be presenting, 8.9% is up a lot more than what the off-premise channels are putting out. It's like 3.1%. But as you know, when you're looking at percentage of sales or percentage growth, you're taking the difference and then you are dividing that by the original amount. So if you have a very large denominator, it's going to be pretty hard to pull off those really high growth, those growth percentages. So this is obviously a much bigger piece of the pie, but it's still important to note that the direct-to-consumer is growing. And that's just, like when you think of a Fortune 500 company, you're not going to see them with 1,000% growth over year, but you would see a startup doing that. And so keep that in mind as we're looking through the data, because we do have a lot of percentage growth that we're looking at. And so just keep in mind that whenever you're starting with a bigger piece of the pie, it's a lot harder to get those big growth rates. And when we compare it from a value standpoint, the Nielsen data shows 5.2% up for off-premise channel versus 11.5% for direct-to-consumer. So exciting stuff happening in the direct-to-consumer channel. This is yours.
So just to expand upon what Kent was saying, if we look at the Nielsen growth rates, the category is growing about 3%. What we're measuring on volume, which on the sort of 166 million cases, that's a pretty impressive number. So we're seeing an increase in actual volume sales to consumers of 4.4 million cases over and above last year, which is awfully impressive. The DTC shipment channel is growing about 3 times faster than the Nielsen channel on volume. And if we move over to value, value sales are growing at about 5%. Your channel is growing about a little over 2 times faster than that. Again, pretty impressive numbers really on both sides of the ledger. One thing to note, and I think it's true in both cases, when value is growing faster than volume, that means one of 2 things is happening. Either prices of actual products are going up and people are buying those more expensive products, or people are shifting from less expensive products to more expensive products. I can certainly talk to the Nielsen side of things, and what's happening from what we see is the actual price of SKUs really hasn't changed much over years and years, which I think is probably an issue for the industry, given that my guess is costs are going up, but you haven't been able to pass those prices all the way through to retail. But since the recession, And during 2 or 3 years ago when people were trading down, that's certainly turned around now and people are starting to move up again. So we're seeing the average price per bottle, per case or whatever, moving up over the last couple of years to kind of where it was back in 2005, 2006, 2007, which is pretty healthy. The other thing which I kind of constantly remind people who are in the wine industry, that you should feel really good about the industry you're in. Sasha talked about feeling good about it for certain reasons. I want to talk about feeling really good about it because those kinds of numbers, those growth numbers, that's not common around. I mean, if you go to a food store, a drugstore, and look at categories, most of them are actually not growing. So Nielsen measures 125 different categories, anything that people buy in food stores, drugstores, convenience stores, and there's very few categories that are growing right now. Just to put that into perspective, if I look at the top 15 categories that were growing in 2010 and 2011, growing in terms of both volume, wine is at the top of all those 125 categories. As a matter of fact, spirits is second. So if you take alcoholic beverages and sort of push beer out of the way, which might be a good thing if you're in the wine industry, we look really good. And in fact, our category is hugely attractive to the retailers that we deal with. And they love this category. The size, the growth, the profit, the basket size, all sorts of really good things. So like I said, there's not really that many categories that are growing. So if I look at what happened in 2011, out of the 125 categories, only 16% were actually growing on volume. 84% were declining. That'll look a little bit different on dollars because of price increases. So when you buy some milk or bread or eggs, it costs you a lot more now than it did a couple years ago. So dollars, it looks a little different, but real unit growth, very uncommon. And we should feel good about the category that we're in, the industry that we're in.
Yeah, so real quick, this is just taking a look at the average bottle price increase. And so what's important, this is a trailing 12-month average that we're looking at. So we're not really super concerned with the big spikes and everything, at least in this presentation. But what is interesting to note is if we were to draw a trend line right there, you see that it's trending up. And so that's important because the prior year, it was actually trending down. So the fact that we show that increase, it's a dollar increase over the year, that's pretty impressive.
So Kent just showed, the average bottle price, $37. I explained a little bit earlier the piece of the pie that Nielsen's measuring. It's the grocery trade, the liquor chains, the drugstores, the some of the independent liquor stores. So versus that $37, what might you guess might be the average price per bottle of wine that we're measuring? Any guesses? 15.7. Okay, so 8. Oh, that's pretty good. So we're getting, obviously, no one said it's going to be more than 37. So everybody's like at least half as much. So to put that $37 into context, we kind of look at it two ways. If we just look at 750 mil bottles, because that's the standard that most of you are dealing with, it's about $9 that we're measuring. Okay, and it really hasn't changed much from last year. If we also take into account all the other bottles, jug wines and Tetra Paks and 3-liter boxes and what else is out there these days? 187 mil bottles, all the other things, and then do the price per equivalent, $7.50, we're actually down to about $6. So for those of you, I heard a couple like 7 and 8, you're in the range of the average price per bottle that we're measuring in sort of the retail trade.
All right. So now we're going to start breaking this down by categories. We have all this data. How can we make this a little bit more usable so we can see? Can everybody see over here? I don't want to get in anyone's way. So the first category that we're going to look at is by price point. You can see a pretty even distribution of price point. Obviously, the $100 plus is the smallest piece of that chart, but pretty evenly distributed. When you look at volume growth, to be honest, it's steady across all of the price points. The lower end had growth. There was one price category that had 4% decline, but that's the $15 to $20. I don't know why. Maybe you can tell me. But if you look at this, and this coincides with the other slide that we mentioned, that the average price per bottle is trending up. If you look at the higher price bottles of wine, there is a lot of growth year over year for that. And I think that's reflective of a lot of different things that we can discuss later.
So if you didn't peek ahead, when Kent broke down the direct-to-consumer shipment channel by price point, I think 86% of all the dollars sold were from bottles $20 and up. So again, given what we measure, what portion of our trade do you think would be from $20 and up on dollars? 5%. Boy, you must get some Nielsen data somewhere along the way. So here's, I guess I need to stay closer. If you follow the sort of the blue, that's the direct-to-consumer numbers that Kent was showing. 86% of all of your dollar sales were generated from $20 and up, which leaves 12% from under $20. If you look at the Nielsen channel on dollars, and it's even more extreme on volume, about 90% of everything that we're measuring is under $15. About 11% is over $15. So if you're participating in those much higher, price ranges, that's certainly tougher to establish your mark in the retail trade. So if we break that down, so if you look at the Nielsen pie and just break it down by price points, we go down as low as under $3. You think of the $2 Chucks of the world or the jug wines and equivalize it to a $7.50, and then we go out to the $20 and plus. But the slivers start to get pretty small as you go further out to the right-hand side, especially on volume. So we took that volume, so 23% of the volume we're measuring is under $3, about 1% is over $20, 2% 15 to 20. But the good thing is, if you look at it from a growth standpoint, the largest growth rates are coming from the furthest right-hand side. So the further we go out to the right now, the higher the growth rates. If I would have showed you this 2 years ago, so 2007, 2008, this would look totally different. The slices would be about the same, but all of the arrows going up would have been on the left-hand side. The arrows going down would have been on the right-hand side. So as people have come out of the sort of Great Recession, the darkest days, and even though things aren't great, people are feeling more confident of spending a bit more money, and they're doing it, and that's why we're seeing those growth rates on the right-hand side. So Kent's now going to break down, go a little bit more granular and talk about winery production size.
All right, so our next category is the production size of the winery. To be honest, this is one of my favorite parts of the presentation. Hopefully you can see the enthusiasm as I present. But we all know this is kind of old news, but like the middle tier, 5,000 to 50,000 case production wineries attribute 50% of the value, 50% of the volume. I mean, it's a big part of the direct-to-consumer shipment. That's really important. The slides that we get to next is kind of where we start to dive into more of the fun stuff. But real quick, show of hands, how many of you have taken an economics class at some point? All right, do you remember the demand curve? Okay, for those of you who don't, I'm going to give you a little tutorial. This is our y-axis. This is sales. So the higher you go is the more sales. The lower you go, zero sales. This is the x-axis, and this is going to be the price of the unit. So in this case, the price of the wine. The further out we go, we get higher priced wines. The closer in, the lower price. So the demand curve goes like this. So obviously, it's not rocket science that when you charge more for your wine, you're going to sell less of it. When you charge less, you're going to sell more of it. So somewhere in there, when you take into consideration the elasticity of your product and its correlation with moving price, then you're going to kind of find that sweet spot for where you're going to maximize the value for your product. And that's what I think is so interesting about these next slides. So you can see some major growth in volume over here in the larger wineries. I think that pays tribute to the fact that, again, the direct-to-consumer model is a viable sales channel, and larger wineries are noticing that, and they're increasing their efforts towards that and making greater sales. One thing to point out right here is the 1,000 to 5,000 production size actually had a drop, almost 4%. So why? Well, if you look at this slide, 15% more price increase. Well, not that they raised prices, but that the value was 15% more, the average price per bottle for that for that category. So again, it's the demand curve. They're charging more, you get less sales. So, but then how did they fare with producing value? 10.5%. So this category shipped less wine. It was at a higher price, and they made more money. So year over year. So it's really impressive from that small category. Let's go back to this large one over here, the 500,000 plus production size wineries. That's some really big volume increase right there, 23.2%. Obviously, it's a smaller piece of the pie again, but it's very considerable growth. Again, look at this. They dropped prices. Maybe they dropped prices. Maybe they just sold more of the lower priced wines. Whatever the case, the demand curve, lower price, more sales. And how did they fare for generating value for the product? 7.6. Again, extremely impressive. Now the big one, 26.8. So if you were paying attention as I've been flipping back and forth, you kind of know the story already. But that is some very significant growth right there in that category. And when we come back over here, they had a 19%. So it's considerable growth in volume. Prices went up, and value went through the roof. So that is extremely impressive. It kind of even goes off of the demand curve that I'm talking about, but it goes back to price point elasticity. Wine tends to be pretty high elasticity, so when you change prices, it's going to correlate pretty substantial. So the best thing about this is that they're finding that right price point and the true value of the wines, which is really exciting to note. All right.
That's good. So we tried to sort of look at winery size within the Nielsen measured world. And it'll probably, when I show you this, it'll also provide some perspective on why it may be difficult for some of your products if you're only dealing direct to consumer, if you wanted to go to the retail trade, because you'll see the concentration. So we looked at wineries. Since we're measuring all the brands, we can group the brands by winery. And then we looked at how big the top 5 wineries are, and then the next 5, the next 10, et cetera. So in our case, the top 5 wineries have a share close to about 50% of all the dollars and about 64% of all the volume in all the Nielsen measured channels. So 5 companies basically do about 50% of the dollars, 2/3 of the volume. Each of those companies are doing, just within the Nielsen measured channels, and obviously they're doing more if you add on-premise and so on, they're doing at least 7 million cases plus. The next 5 is that green sliver. They're 2 to 7 million cases. Then the blue is 550 to 2 million, and so on and so forth. So you can see how that concentration is pretty extreme on the left-hand side. If we just look at volume, so that's that volume split, the top 5 wineries, 64%. The next 5, now we're up to 64 and 11, now we're up to 3/4 of the business, and so on. So that doesn't leave, a huge slice for the all other, which are wineries that are doing less than, I think it was 90,000 cases. If we look at growth, it was a pretty good story. I mean, basically wineries from all different sort of size wineries achieved growth last year, except for the sort of top, the top 11 to 20. There was a couple companies in there to sort of drag that whole group down. But like I think Kent was showing, if we actually looked at that on value, every single sort of size winery did pretty well. So it didn't matter if you were a big company, a mid-sized company, or a small company. You had equal chances with your kind of colleagues or buddies in that group to grow at least dollars, and that's what everybody did last year, which was a pretty good story. So I think the next sort of granular piece we want to look at is what are the varietals that are hot, what are the varietals maybe that aren't doing so well in both sides of the fence. So,
Okay. So this is probably no surprise. 58% of all the cases shipped come from Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. And I think that's pretty much on par with how it was last year. Actually, how many people were in this talk last year? Just show up. Okay. And one thing that I want to point out, just to discuss later, is Zinfandel. It makes up about 10% of that piece of the pie. So looking at the demand increase year over year, Cabernet was up, Pinot Noir up, Chardonnay was up, Zinfandel up a lot, 18%. It's quite a dramatic increase. The Cabernet, not so much, but again, it's a larger piece of the pie, so the larger growth rates are a little bit difficult to achieve. So moving on to the average price per bottle, though, when you get to varietals, and we all probably know this, but look at the Cabernet. So the overall average is $37.69, and the Cabernet is a rock star, completely blows that out of the water, skews the average. It's just impressive what's happening over there. Consumers are willing to pay good money for Cabernet Sauvignon. Pinot Noir is up as well. It's also above average. Those are the only two that are above the average. And what's interesting that's not on this chart about those two is that the Cabernet, both the Cabernet and the Pinot, went up $3 from last year. So it achieved a lot of growth as well in that. And then another thing to note is that sparkling wine actually went down by $5 year over year. So for whatever reason, consumers are not willing to pay as much for sparkling last year. Now, 71. Now we're looking at the value. So those same three varietals, Cabernet, Pinot, and Chardonnay, make up 71%. So it was 58% when we were dealing with volume, but now when you get over to value, 71%. And Cabernet makes up 41% of that, and that's because of that huge skew in the average bottle price. And I'll pass it up.
So this is the sort of the Nielsen measured varietal wheel, if Kent was showing the direct-to-consumer piece of it. And some of the players, some of the names are the same, but some are different. So our top three, Merlot would be our third, whereas I think you had Pinot Noir in your top three. So rumors of Merlot's death are a little bit exaggerated, although it's sort of declining year on year. But it's still up there, certainly in terms of volume, which is what this is. So our top three would be Chardonnay, number one, whereas Cabernet Sauvignon was number one in the DTC channel, followed by Cabernet Sauvignon, then Merlot. These are just the sort of the top 13, plus I threw in sparkling wine. There's other ones that I didn't include in here. So if you take all those 13 together and say that's 100%, this is how the shares break out. So certainly some differences. I mean, Zinfandel isn't as high here as it is in your channel. But there's some like, and we'll talk about Moscato in a second just because of the growth. You can see Moscato at 5% of the volume. 3 years ago it was sort of a blip, a tiny little blip. Now it's a huge, pretty big piece of the pie now and getting bigger every year. So if we look at it from a growth standpoint, if I can get there. So generally, if your arrows going up mean growth, the higher the arrow, the larger the growth. So generally, more arrows certainly going up than going down. There's a couple that are going down, and we all know White Zin continues to sort of go down, and it's not big in your channel. Merlot, like I said, it's still big, but it's sort of down single digits almost year on year now. Riesling's down a bit, and I think that's probably because there's some trade-offs to some of the other sweeter wines like Moscato, which based on some work we've done, that certainly influences some of the negative trends there. And Syrah is down a lot. Now, this is import and domestic, and a lot of that's been driven by Australia just as a group not doing well in general. So then if we talk about what's really doing well, you see some arrows going up, but there's some bigger arrows that I didn't show before. So Pinot Noir is up about 10% on volume. Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris is up also 10% on volume. So those two that's some pretty nice increases on the kinds of bases that we're measuring. Malbec, which is smaller for domestic, obviously bigger for import, especially Argentina, continues to rocket up. It's up 25% this year. And then the one that I saved for kind of last is Moscato. So that's that piece there. This year it's up, last 12 months up 56%. Last year it was up 75%. The year before it was up 100%. People sort of laughed at the beginning, well, 100%, you can, so what, you sell one case and you go to 2 cases, that's 100%. But it's, like Kent said, playing with numbers. But now when we're seeing 56%, those are huge numbers. The other one that I didn't show on here, and I'm not sure how Kent and your group categorize it, but I didn't put blends here. And if I just took all the blends, especially some of the newer red blends and a little bit of white blends, like Apothic and 14 Hands, and it started with Menage, say, 3 or 4 years ago, and added all that up. That's about 5% now of the category, and it is growing at 17, 18, 19, 20% pretty consecutively. So blends as just a category are doing extremely well, and there's sweet blends and not so sweet blends. In some cases, the grapes are on the back of the label. In other cases, it just talks about the taste. So all different sorts of things out there, but that is sort of a grouping unto itself is certainly something that's certainly gaining a lot of notoriety within the channels that we're measuring, if not yours. Oops. Not much different here. These are the same numbers, but just on a value basis. So if I was to, take a look at our top 5 beyond Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, I'd be throwing in Pinot Grigio, and we also put in sparkling, and those top 5 would be about 75% of the dollars. But you can see, some of the other ones as well. Pinot Noir goes up quite a lot on value compared to volume because of its higher price. So everything that we're looking at price-wise is at a much lower level than the prices that Kent was showing, because your average price is $37 and our average price is $9. But that's how ours would look. So after sparkling, which includes some, again, because it includes imports and some of the champagnes which drive the average price up, then Pinot Noir and Zinfandel are kind of the next two, with average prices pretty close to $10 a bottle.
Thank you. All right, so the next category that we're going to look at is by destination. So this is the shipping destinations, and we've highlighted several on here, but really what I want to point out is the top 3 shipping destinations. It accounts for nearly 50%. Obviously, California is really high on there, but Texas, and remember that, Texas is one of the top 3 at 9%, and then we have New York at 7%. So 50% of the destinations, and then Florida's not doing too bad either. This is growth. So number of shipments growth year over year. Again, Texas is in there, 11%. So what we were saying before, not only is it one of the top 3, so we do have a lot of volume already going there, but it's also putting off some of the biggest growth numbers. That is extremely impressive, something to take note of. Obviously, we have Maryland is new, so it's throwing off some very large percentage growth. Tennessee, new, large growth. Kansas is pretty new as well. Some big growth there. So we expect New Jersey to also show some really big growth next year. Now we're going to take a look at regional performance and kind of dig into here in California. So we have Napa, Sonoma, the rest of California, and then we're going to also say non-California. So 16% of the shipment volume is originating from non-California wineries. 34% for Napa. Napa, Sonoma, pretty close. Napa's still leading that race. And when we look at growth, though, Sonoma, fast approaching. So 9.2% growth for Sonoma versus 6.5% for Napa. Now, the Napa brand, as far as the value, when we get back to the amount sold, and this is the average bottle price, we take a look at the average, $37.69. Napa is way up there, $55. So they're winning the brand race. And if you've been paying attention, why is that?
Cabernet.
Yeah, Cabernet. There's a lot of Cab coming out of Napa. Here's the share of the dollars. So 50% of the value is coming out of Napa, which is impressive, again, because of the Cabernet. This is looking at the increased revenue. It's looking at Napa, Sonoma, the rest of California, and non-California. So 15% for non-California is a big increase for there. 7% Sonoma, 13% in Napa. So again, this is a big piece of the pie and putting off some impressive growth rates. So something to take note of. Real quick on the Nielsen data, the wine that is being shipped, or the wine that he's reporting on, is actually 94% originating from California. So Washington and Oregon make up about 4% of that. But they had pretty substantial growth. But again, making up 94% of it and still putting off 5.3% growth, very impressive. The top varietals for Napa, this is exactly what we were seeing in those previous slides. 43% of the wine coming out of Napa is Cabernet. Only 6% is Zinfandel. So remember, we're remembering Zinfandel in the back of our mind. Merlot, Pinot, Chardonnay is 13%. When we change this and look over at Sonoma, Pinot is the big ticket for Sonoma. Cabernet is only 14%, and then look at Zinfandel. We have 15% of the pie is attributed to Zinfandel coming out of the Sonoma region. For the rest of California, it's Pinot, then Cab, then Chardonnay, and then Zinfandel. So there's that 14%. So it's a pretty substantial piece of the pie that we're dealing with. And then there's a lot of other ones that are smaller in there. And we will have this slide deck because again, there's a lot of slides, a lot of good information. Well, at least I don't think you're going to retain it all. Maybe you will. Maybe we were such excellent presenters that you're just like, wow, rattling off numbers all day. But if not, you'll have the slides. And so, real quick on this Zinfandel, what I wanted to mention, I actually wrote it down because it's not on the slide, is if you remember, of the whole piece of the pie, it was about 10% was attributed to Zinfandel. But the growth was 18.1% year over year. And when we look at the Napa region, it grew about 10%. And in Sonoma, it grew 10%. The rest of California, it grew 30%. Non-California, it grew 55%. So there's some fun, interesting stuff happening with Zinfandel that would be interesting to investigate. All right, so this is towards the end of our presentation here. I think we've made pretty good time, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. But generational differences, Generation X, that's me, in case you didn't notice, the gray hair, is doing pretty well. I was actually pretty impressed with this. That when you look at the average price point between the baby boomers and the Generation X, it's the same. Total sales, it's pretty close, and same with the average order total. It's pretty close. We're gaining fast. The Gen Xers are getting wine. So the millennial, they have some work to do. It's 3.2%, and as we were talking about, we don't know what happened if you were over 66 and you bought wine. You're not even on the map. So I don't know, but maybe it's just so small that we didn't even attribute you a percentage. Sorry about that. But the millennial, we need some marketing towards the millennial, I guess. I don't know. You tell me. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see how the millennial grows. And actually, the next slide, Danny can show you comparison of this with what's happening in the in-store market.
This one really interested me because I only saw it yesterday. So I sort of looked at, what would that look like within what we're measuring? How would it break out? And because we just got to it yesterday, we weren't able to exactly match up age groups and so on. But to the best extent that we could, we looked at millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, and seniors within our sector. So the 21 to 34, which we would call the millennial generation, actually goes from sort of 17 to 34. But if you just look at the legal drinking age piece of it, so 19% of wine is sourced from consumers 21 to 34. You were showing 3.2% or something like that. So, and even that 19% is less than sort of the millennial fair share. So if we looked at how important millennials are, or how important are 21 to 34-year-olds amongst legal age drinkers to start with, you can see that index is 72. So they're sort of underperforming relative to their importance to the population. Whereas boomers, 45 to 64, they're contributing 42% of the volume, which is 18% larger than their share. So boomers are certainly, where the foundation for the category is. There's no question about that. But millennials is also where there's a ton of activity. If we looked at growth relative to this for the category, a lot of the growth would be at the 21 to 34, secondarily sort of the 35 to 44 Gen Xers. So a lot of the growth is coming from the younger ages, and we've done a great job in sort of stealing occasions from beer, especially, and most people drink beer, wine, and/or spirits at different times, so it's really fighting for occasions, and we've done a pretty good job in taking beer occasions. Although I would also warn you that the beer industry knows that, and they're trying to do a lot of stuff to take some of that back. But that whole thing sort of was curious to me, just that 3.2%, and even though we're out a couple of years versus 19%, and our 19% is low. So I would sort of concur with what Kent was saying that we probably have some work to do to figure out how to capture that younger drinker. So that's the index to the population importance. So for instance, 21 to 34-year-olds are about 25% of the number of people. So if you take 19 divided by 25, you'll get 72. Boomers are about 36 or 37% of the population, so 42 divided by 36 is 118. So when you see an index over 100, they're an important group beyond and above their population importance. Okay. And I will turn it over to Mr. Work.
Thank you. These first help me in thanking Danny and Kent for spending a lot of time maybe you can or maybe you can't imagine the kind of data these guys actually went through to come up with this, but it's pretty significant. And I've got a couple questions for them, and if you do too, we're going to go ahead and call on you now. We finished pretty early, which makes me very happy and proud. I have one singular question actually for the both of you that I wanted you to think about and see if you have an answer for us. Based on what you presented to us, what do you see as the most significant trends for direct-to-consumer marketers that they need to take away from this?
Want to go first? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, when I've been working in the beverage alcohol part of Nielsen for about 10 or 12 years, and first of all, it was hard to get data like this from the direct-to-consumer side a few years ago. But when I started looking at it, it was really, it was small. And each year, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as I think about sort of the structure of the trade, and consumers want lots of different experiences with lots of different brands. Retailers, only have X amount of space, and there's only a small amount of distributors. And if you want to go through that route, that's seeming to me to be tougher and tougher. So I just see the prospects for this channel, as the laws change and so on, but just the structure of the trade is going to continue to expand this channel to some pretty large. I mean, it's getting to be large already, and it's going to get a lot bigger. So, and the only other thing I would say is that as it gets bigger, it's going to get more and more competitive, and sort of keeping your eye on all these different trends out there. There's generational trends. There's multicultural trends. Is anybody doing anything about Hispanics that By the way, the non-whites will be more important than whites in 15, 20 years, and California probably are already there. So what are you doing about those sorts of things? Are you keeping abreast of those varietal trends? Because everybody's looking for the next big thing. So you can choose to be a follower, that's okay, or you can choose to be a leader, or you can choose to kind of follow what the leaders do and get into it as quickly as you can. So sort of keep abreast of everything that else is going on so that you can be in the right places. That's what I'd say.
All right, so for me, he did say trends, so I have three things that kind of popped out at me whenever I was going through the data. Number one is the average bottle price, the increase, and how steady that has become, and seeing some of the value numbers that are taking into that into consideration. So the average bottle price, it's always a challenge for a company to price a product, and I think it's really important to know that the consumers are getting back to where they're feeling comfortable to purchase higher dollar bottles of wine. There's a lot of growth there. Another thing that was really impressive is just to see the continued growth in the higher production size wineries. They're continuing to focus on direct to consumer. I think that's really important. And I think the more that we get the larger wineries focused on this, the more we're going to be able to figure out how to grow that market even more. So that's going to be really interesting. Last thing was the destination, the growth of Texas being so high, and yet it's one of the one of the biggest states that is already shipped to. So I think that's impressive and something to watch.
And for those of you who saw our presentation last year, this is the second year in a row we've seen a fairly significant increase among the really large wineries in the direct-to-consumer channel. So they're clearly spending more time thinking about studying and working in that channel. And the thing about the larger wineries is they have far more resources than the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 case wineries that make up the largest, a larger number of wineries shipping direct. And because they have more resources, they're going to be able to experiment with different kinds of direct-to-consumer sales techniques. And that's something to watch. So I would argue that the larger wineries should be watched closely in terms of the different things that they're trying to do in this channel. So with that, any questions at all from the audience? Yes, sir.
I'm surprised at how high the direct shipment numbers were from outside of California. Is that mostly within states like Texas, do you think, or is it, do you have any idea?
Well, that was originating, yeah. Oh, repeat the question. Yeah, there we go.
I was surprised at how high the numbers for direct shipments were from outside California, 16%. And I just wondered if that's mostly within states like Texas, or is it from state to state?
Was that shipments to outside of California? Is that what you're referring to, or originating? Okay, originating. Yeah. Actually, I don't know which states would be contributing the most to that. Obviously, Oregon and Washington would play a big part in that, but we didn't focus too much in on originating outside of California, unfortunately.
You're right, and it increased last year also. This is only domestically produced. Yeah, so the outside California is going to be primarily Oregon. It's funny that I connect Oregon and Pinot Noir, isn't it? Oregon, Washington, a little bit of New York, and more actually out of Texas also. But we also saw the same increase last year in terms of outside California. Question here?
Thanks. I was pretty startled by the low percentage of millennials in the purchase. I think it was 3.4%. Is there any clue as to why you attribute that low number? Is it income capability? Is it particularly in the sense that a lot of people are focusing on millennials as they progress forward on the D2C campaign? Why so low?
Well, do you want to answer?
I don't know if I can. I was startled. I was startled by that number too. I think it'd be worthwhile, as you guys dig into the numbers, to take apart the DTC channel into, because I think you've got tasting room shipments versus clubs versus, so maybe the people that are going online to order, the millennial number is going to be a lot higher. I mean, I'd be startled if it wasn't. I personally don't think it's a price thing, because anything that we've ever looked at millennials, despite the fact that when kids are graduating from school these days, often they don't have jobs, and you'd think they'd be very price conscious. To anything that we've looked at, they're not terribly price conscious, even though they wouldn't seem to have some of the income. So I don't think it's an income thing. I think you need to dig into the numbers to figure out which part of it is the problem, and then see if it's a marketing thing or something. Because to me, it represents, if it's really that low, the good part is that it's a huge opportunity. Ken, I don't know if you.
Is there any chance, just offhand, that John Gillespie's in the room here today? John Gillespie's at wineopinions.com, and he's done some great work on the millennial cohort. And what he's found is that older millennials versus younger millennials act significantly differently in terms of their wine buying habits. And one of the things that's actually true is that millennials are simply not anywhere near their peak buying years, whereas you look at the baby boomers, that's where the money is. And I think also Silicon Valley Bank recently made the statement that if you want to sell more wine, you need to think about boomers. That is where the money is right now with the boomer population. Now, 20 years from now, we're not going to care anything about the boomers. They're, where they are. But we will care an awful lot about the millennials because they'll be moving into their peak earning years.
I only take offense because I will be that person.
It turns out.
I continue to drink a lot of wine. Actually, no, I was going to say the one thing is that I think one fascinating thing is, will boomers really, will today's boomers, what will their behavior be like? Because they're not retiring, without incomes these days, even though the recession hasn't helped. And they want to maintain a pretty active and healthy lifestyle, unlike maybe it was. So in past generations, so I wouldn't give up on seniors. In fact, like a lot of the companies that we deal with outside of beverage alcohol do a great job in marketing to seniors. I mean, if you look at generational things, the growth in terms of population is in seniors. I mean, people over 65, that group is going to get bigger and bigger because boomers are getting into that, people are living longer, et cetera. So, I mean, I live in South Orange County. We've got Leisure World around us. It's like thousands of older people, and they're really active, and some companies do a great job in marketing to that community. So don't give up on me.
Is there an AARP wine club?
Well, I mean, the AARP...
There really should be, huh?
The AARP has, if anybody subscribes to their magazine, apparently they have like 3 or 4 different versions of their magazine. So they've got like a 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80. I mean, I don't know, I think it's a significant group not to lose touch with.
Well, and one other comment about the millennial is the age cutoff. So we had 21 to 29, which is actually kind of lower on the, if you look at the Nielsen data, they were actually using 21 to 34. So, and piggybacking on what Tom was saying, that the upper end of the millennials are purchasing a lot more. So it may be that we're just putting those into the Gen X, and so that's why we're getting the increased over there. So anyway, that could be part of the discussion as well.
Question over here.
I actually wanted to add to that. I actually read some reports, and what they're saying is that younger age group, they're more inclined to buy beer right now. So I think that's kind of where our marketing needs to come into play, is focusing on that.
Interesting, yeah.
Just the one thing I would just add about beer, because I do think it's a fight for occasions, because like I said, we have data that shows how many people actually buy all categories. And craft beers are doing just I mean, that's where I think your battleground is, because craft beers, which are also, higher price point, and it's kind of like, reminds me of wine, lots of assortment, lots of fun stories, and they're coming out with all the different flavors of crafts and everything. So I think that's kind of a big, and all the big beer companies who have lots of money to spend are investing in craft beers. They're either buying companies or incubating their own, because they know they're losing volume. The Buds Lights, that's not where the biz, it's a lot of volume, but that's declining.
Quick question. When you talk about value, are you talking about list price or actual sales price?
That's sales price.
Sales price. Thank you.
Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm loud, so you can probably hear me. I was just curious, have you looked at any about, like, repeat buying? Is there any way you can tell through your data whether it's the same people doing multiple purchases? And I just wondered if that would have anything to do with perhaps the millennials, where we talk about them not being brand loyal, they're always trying new things. And I would think a lot of the D2C purchasing are people who have developed a relationship with a brand and are trying to be brand loyal and purchasing the same thing multiple times.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We haven't done any of that, but I think that could certainly attribute to that, because the brand loyalty is obviously a lot less for the younger generation. So maybe bouncing around could be attributing.
We can also say that at ShipCompliant right now, they're delving into another set of data where they're actually going to be looking at purchases by single customers across different sellers. And the bulk of that data will probably be produced at the next conference next year, but it should be pretty interesting. This information on the millennials or the different generations is the first that we have to come out of that research. So there will be more of that sort of thing coming. Any other questions? Okay, I have a couple announcements then. First of all, we have lunch coming up here pretty soon. I wanted to let you know that in addition to this courtyard area out here where you can all sit and have lunch, there's also an area down that way, and over here, we sort of spillover area. So if that gets filled up, you can go down this way. I'm also going to encourage you all to take part in the scavenger hunt that we're doing. Go around, see all the vendors, get your scavenger hunt cards stamped, learn what the vendors and the sponsors, what they're doing and what's new. You're probably all sitting on a survey card. I want to encourage you highly just to pick it up and go through it real quick and just let us know how we're doing up here. I'm also encouraged to remind you about the photo booth. We really want that ammunition. So when you have a chance, get yourself in the photo booth, take a photo, and I promise it won't show up online at all. And finally, if you guys have lost anything, we do indeed have a lost and found. It's out near the registration area. And unless there are any more questions, I want to thank you all for attending this very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.